Hey, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. This is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. And I have Candice Pedraza Yamnitz here with me. I am so excited to get to talk to her about writing children's books, which is not a conversation I've had the opportunity to have yet. But before we launch into that, a little bit about Candice. She is a homeschooling mom, author, and teacher. She taught in an elementary dual language classroom for 7 years before having her own three spirited children. She mentored teen girls for years and aims to inspire through stories. In 2017, she joined the American Christian Fiction Writers, ACFW, to improve her craft, and she has served as president of the Chicago chapter. Her work is placed in 4 contests. Her writing contains a Latin twist, which comes from her Puerto Rican and Mexican upbringing. She also adds a heavy dollop of mystery and sometimes an extra helping of romance. She fell in love with Lord of the Rings,
Mhm.
which is something we definitely have in common, and Pride and Prejudice in high school, and hasn't stopped reading since. In between reading lessons and converting cardboard boxes into pirate ships, she writes and illustrates fantasy stories. She lives in her native Chicagoland. So thank you so much for being here with me today, Candice.
Yes, thank you for having me.
This is awesome. So I have been following you on Instagram for years. Honestly, it's just a really upbeat, positive um, look at the Bookstagram world. If you want to check out her, I keep wanting to say channel because here we are on YouTube, but her feed. I'll put all the links down below. We'll have an opportunity for all of that at the end. But first, tell me a little bit about how you got into writing in the first place.
Well, I was reading YA novels, and at this time, I was also mentoring girls at church. So I had youth group of girls. They would tell me what they would read. I'd read similar things to them, and I enjoy YA. I love coming of age stories. And as I'm reading these books, I'm realizing, wow, these messages are not for me, and they're not good. But the story is amazing. And I'm wondering, okay, where are all the other authors who write these uplifting, good themed stories? Like, where are they? And because I couldn't find it, I started writing. Now,
Mm.
when I say I started writing, I was super naive. I thought, okay, I'll write the book, I'll read it again, do go one, edit through, and then I'm done. Yeah, I soon learned that that doesn't work. So that's how I got started. I ended up going to the ACFW because I was completely lost and had no idea what I needed to do to improve.
Mm. That's interesting. So you started a little bit later. So often, I mean, you hear a huge variety of ways that people get into writing, but many people say, "Oh, I started when I was just a kid." But for you, it was different. You were a reader for years and years, and just found this type of book that was missing, and you thought, "I'll step in where I'm needed." Then that's
Yes.
interesting.
So, as a kid, I liked stories. I didn't like reading, but I kept a journal. So it's not like I never wrote. I wrote every single day. But I
Mm,
mean, it would be maybe poems, it'd be letters, it'd be all sorts of different things, but I never considered writing on a professional level. And I didn't think I could do it, honestly.
mm,
So that's how come I love going into classrooms and telling kids who think that they have no skill in writing. It's like, actually, you can. Anyone could do it. It's just a matter of putting the time and effort into it. And if you're already reading, well, that's one step, okay? Because you do have to read. You have to be a
mm.
really avid reader and learn to read like a writer instead of just read like a reader. And it took me a little bit to make that transfer. Now I'm having a hard time reading like a reader again when I want to. So yeah, it was a little bit later in life. This wasn't
Mm.
my dream.
You're speaking my language, though. I'm glad that you're telling kids, yes, you can. You have to want it and you have to work for it. It's not just something that you can do and do it perfectly the first time around. But that's such an important and true message for kids to be hearing, that maybe they're not great at it at this moment, but they can become really good. I love that.
Yeah.
So you were an elementary school teacher for a long time, and now you teach your own kids. In your opinion, what are some ingredients to a great children's book in particular?
I would say, I mean, obviously the kid has to have autonomy. They have to be able to make their own decisions. So obviously this is why
Mm.
we get a lot of the dead parent syndrome in there.
Oh,
But
right, yeah.
yeah, they have to be able to make their own decisions. So you have to have a little bit of that where they're making their own decisions and they're going on adventure. It keeps children wanting to know what happens next. There has to be that drop of like, okay, if you stop here, you're not going to know what happens. There's something more. So as long as a story continues to give you that little drop of like, okay, continue reading for this purpose, I think that makes a good story for kids, particularly. And as someone, I used to read to third or fourth graders all the time. We had our story time. I forgot what we call it now. Wow, a read alouds. And at the end of every chapter, you can tell the kids were engaged if I would close the book and they didn't want me to close it. So I mean, that's the same thing for YA. Like I also write YA, but it's a little different because you're going into more complicated elements. If you don't have that cliffhanger, it's not necessarily making or break the book. Compared to with the children's book, you kind of have to have it.
So there's more immediacy, more in terms of a fast pace, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yes, there has to be a fast pace. There has to be a reason for them to continue going. And it has to be very immediate. Like when you turn the page, you're going to find out that this happens and the kid wants to turn the page. So I found that to be something that was kind of a little bit different than YA. Yes, we should have it in YA. But, you know, with YA, you're focusing so much on the character arc, and sometimes you'll have a little bit of slower pace thing in there because you're planting a seed for 10 chapters from now. Compared to in a chapter book, it has to happen quick and it has to happen now, and they have to know it's going to happen in the next chapter, or else we've lost engagement. So, and also another thing with children's books is they have to be more, I'm like, texture, more textile. Like they have to be able to, it's not what's it called? They have a word in my head, I promise. No, but it can't be like over their heads. It has to feel like, okay, I see the color. The color is red. It's right there. This is what they're doing. This is what they're seeing.
Like super tangible kind of
Tangible.
imagery.
That's the word.
Okay.
I'm like abstract and tangible. That's the words I'm thinking of. It can't be abstract. It has to be very tangible. And that was something that my editor definitely pointed out right away. She's like, okay, I love how it's tangible here. Right here, you might want to make it a little more tangible. And here's a quick solution for that. So that was like another thing for kids. That's a little bit different for YA.
That's interesting. I mean, once you say it, it's obvious. Of course, it needs to be tangible and right there and understandable for kids, but it's not something I immediately would have thought of. That's fantastic. I'll have to keep that in mind because of course I want to write all the things and all the genres, and I think it would be so fun to do a children's book at some point. I have no immediate plans, but I'll have to keep that nugget in mind.
Yeah.
So kids, that children's books, that encompasses so much. I mean, that's everything from like a board book to, you know, you're going into middle school and then you start getting different designations, and there's just such a range at that time. So how can you make sure that you're both writing and marketing to the correct audience, you know, if it's kids who are 7 and 8, or you know, how do you navigate that?
So with that, that's a little bit harder. I think you have to spend time with kids to know exactly where they are. And honestly, that changes also. Especially if you're writing something a little bit more contemporary, you have to know what the lingo is and everything. And you have to be very considerate of like, okay, I don't want to also to my book, like my book might not be great 3 years from now because I put so much current lingo in it. So I have to take that out a little bit, but still make it relevant for the kids that age. Right now I have kids who are, how old are they now? 7 and 9. And that's what I wrote it for. I wrote it for my children. And my youngest was 2 years old when I wrote this, but he's now 3. And I wanted to read it to them all at the same time. So what interests all 3 of them at the same time? And as a homeschooling mom, that's something I really love because if I read a middle grade book, it would be only for my 9-year-old. If I read a chapter book, sometimes it's a little bit too young now for my 9-year-old. You know, she's getting at that stage. And my 3-year-old, he's very hard to keep his attention. So I wanted to put elements in there that they would recognize from other books, but also to keep their attention. So I think it's spending time with kids, first of all, spending time with your audience, who you're selling to is not the kids. You're selling to the parents. So what do parents want at that age? You have to be very cognizant of that. And my audience, probably if they're homeschool parents like me, positive message, they'd want sentences that are not all simple sentences. Okay. So you start getting into the nitty gritty.
Oh,
They're going,
please, please.
yes, they want complicated sentences as well. And you do this all the time with an adult novel or even YA. You're right. You're looking through your novel, making sure that the sentences are changing every paragraph and they don't start the same way every paragraph either. But with a children's novel, you also wanted to make them shorter, the sentences, so that it could be a little bit easier for them to read. But I also want to consider the parents involved, and I want to challenge children a little bit, not too much. So I have to make sure I'm kind of working in complex sentences and compound sentences without making it too hard for them. So, I mean, you have to have, first of all, an editor who understands that and understands the language that kids will understand and be able to read. And you want to make sure that you didn't go over their heads with your descriptions as well, while still challenging. So it's interesting. I think with that sort of thing, you have to really be around kids in
I
order
love
to.
it. You have all these subconscious things that you're doing behind the scenes. So hopefully nobody actually notices, the kids and the parents don't notice. They just are engrossed and sort of challenged by what
Yeah.
it is that you're presenting. You're the one who knows, okay, I'm using tangible details and compound complex sentences every now and then. But that I like it when people are aware of what they're doing as writers,
Yes.
to have a huge impact on their audience, on their story.
Yes. And the other element is, what lesson are you teaching too?
Mm.
My audience is going to want a good lesson in there. They're homeschool parents. They want something to help them with their children who are fighting all the time. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with this normal situation? And also not glorifying if the kids do something wrong, because in every story there's a problem. So someone has to do something wrong, but we can't glorify it. We have to kind of figure out a way to make it known right away that, oh, they understand they did wrong and this is what you do in the future. So there's like a multi levels of thinking about a children's book, and a children's book's a lot different than a kid's book, or not kid's book, a YA book, in the way that you have to kind of do it quickly, because if the kid's reading for 5 chapters, this kid who's complaining and whining and thinking it's good, and let's say they never make it to the next chapters, now they're copying this behavior. So it has to be known pretty quickly. This is unacceptable. Compared to in a YA book, my character in Unbetrothed, so I don't know, this is also what I wrote, but in Unbetrothed, she's kind of snobby, and she is struggling with her self-worth, and she reacts poorly to it. And I can continue have this go on for chapters without feeling like my audience is going to think this is good. It's evident it's bad. Everyone knows that's bad. And for a YA audience, they're not going to copy that behavior. They're going to see, okay, well, how does she get out of this? Obviously, she's hinting that something's going to change. So they will have a little bit more patience getting to that part of it without me worrying that they're going to copy this behavior, compared to this. I better say it pretty quickly within the same chapter.
Right, and inspire them to do the right thing, because that's the good way to be, the way that is glorified in the story. So so would you mind holding up Dessi and Kygo Poof? So not only did you write this book, but you illustrated it as well. I am so curious about that whole process of being an illustrator of your own work. Can you tell us about that?
So honestly, I never intended this book to be illustrated by me, but when I was writing it, I decided to make illustrations. I had a friend I met at a SCWBI conference. Am I saying it right? I always mess that one up. The Society of Children's and Writers and Illustrators, or something like that. So
good luck. I'll just say sure. Yeah, sounds good to me.
I met a friend there, and she was an illustrator, and she ended up getting a literary agent and living up the road for me. I invited her to go to this school. So I did a class during lunchtime where I taught middle school kids about how to write novels. They wanted to learn how to write. And I also decided, I'm like, hey, I'll bring in an illustrator, because I think it's a good opportunity to see how people can get involved in that. And a lot of kids like illustrating. While she was giving her speech, I think she was speaking more to me than the kids, because I'm sitting there, I'm like, wait, you were self-taught. You just bought a program, you looked at YouTube videos, and you just practiced a lot. And you went to conferences and you started learning, and I'm just like, okay, well, I can do that. I mean, I'm not like the worst artist. I can try. So I started doing that. I got a free program at first. I started practicing, and when I was tired of writing, I would draw. So when I wrote this book, like back in like 2020, I was just like, okay, well, what do I want? I would want it to look like this. So I started making my own illustrations, and my agent had put it on submission. People were interested. It went to a big publishing house, like the Big Five. They were interested. It took them a year to get back to me to say, it just doesn't fit on the schedule. Like, okay, doesn't fit on the schedule. Like, what does that mean? It means there were too many other authors. I don't know. That's what I assumed it meant. I have no idea, but it didn't end up getting picked up. And now my kids are about to turn the age of the kids in the book. So I decided, I'm like, I'm going to publish it. And I started doing the illustrations. I got Clip Studio Paint. It's not free, but it's relatively inexpensive. And I have the digital pen. So I'm going to draw my illustrations. I did some of them on paper and I transferred them. And then some of them I just did on my own. I just kind of had scenes that popped out in my head, and I did that. Now that I've done the whole process of self-publishing and everything, I think for the next book, I am going to have the story all written and do the formatting beforehand so that I can break the pictures in the exact right spot. Because if you've ever done formatting before, when you change one thing, you change everything. And now there's clunky pictures in between. So I think I'm going to do it the opposite way. This time I have the book written and formatted, and then I'll do the illustrations to fit the book. So it was interesting. I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did. Feel free to interject.
Yeah, absolutely. I just didn't know how somebody would get into that necessarily. If you had been an artist first, I've known people who were artists who kind of tried writing afterwards, and it's just different for everyone. So I was curious what the whole process is. But it sounds attainable for anybody who really wants it, which is
Yeah.
great. You taught yourself and figured it
I
out,
like
and it looks great.
YouTube videos and stuff. And I know I'm not like, I like my illustrations. I'm very proud of them. And I'm like, I know that I can improve, and I can see places where I can improve. And I did the best that I could with what I have. And I think you can say that about any form of art. I've always been into doing illustrations for fun. Like before I even was writing, I was illustrating just like sketches and everything, just on my own, just for fun, because that's what I like to do to kind of fill myself up. Like, okay, I need a break. So this is what I do for fun. It was kind of like my journaling. And
Mm.
illustrating Dessi and Kai has kind of been something that pushed me into like, okay, now I have to perfect it. I can't just leave it half done, and I can't leave extra marks on them, because when you do digital art, there's a little difference between digital art and just sketching on a sketchbook, I would say.
Mm.
Like working with multiple layers and learning how to do the coloring and making sure it looks nice and the type of coloring you do. Like for instance, whenever you do covers, it's an CMK. So I forgot what it was exactly, but if you look at when you export your files, you could export it in RBG, or you could do it in CMK or something like that. And the coloring looks different. So you have to have be cognizant that your colors are going to change a little bit. And you have that in mind when you're illustrating a cover particularly. Also, something fun. I don't know. Have you ever done illustrations in your books?
I actually have a project in the works that I commissioned a couple of illustrations for, and they
Yeah.
look awesome. I definitely did not do them, but it was pencil, I believe. Anyway, why do you ask?
No, I ask because it makes a difference when you're indie publishing, how you do your illustrations. For instance, okay, so I have this, I don't have it going to the edge. This is no bleed. It makes a difference in cost, final cost, if you have bleed or no bleed in your pages.
Hmm.
So when I was doing my art, I had to make sure I cut off all the edges so that it's not going over the edge, because it would add to my cost.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why a lot of children's chapter books are done like that, because it makes it more affordable. And a big thing between books that are children's books and these type of books is that you have illustrations. It's going to up the cost, but this one I'm charging $8.99, which, okay, that's probably about the going price. This is right now well, this one's more expensive, but like, let's say if it was the paperback, it would be $16.99. There's a bigger point difference. So this one I probably get, if I go on Ingram Spark or Barnes and Noble or something, this is probably like $3.47. something like this for just the paper charge. The paperback of Unbetrothed is 8 something, but I'm charging $16.99. So I'm actually getting a bigger point difference with this one. So if I go to a place, I make my money faster through this book than I make it through this book. So it's just interesting to see, like, when you get to the nitty gritty of the difference between kids' books and the older books, you get more money for this one compared to this one eventually, because then you're thinking through 47, that didn't include that I had an editor. I had a couple editors work with me on this. So that also adds to the base costs, and I
Right.
can't sell it for that much more expensive, even though it did cost me like a little bit less, but it still cost me something.
Hmm. Yeah, I appreciate you getting into the nitty-gritty. I mean, general advice is fantastic. I'm not going to shove it away or anything, but a lot of people hesitate to bring in those really finer points that I'm so interested in. How much does it cost to um, print both of them with Ingram's Park? So I appreciate you going there.
Yeah,
Um, s- so for other writers who want to write children's stories, you've already given some really excellent pieces of advice, but is there anything else you would say to somebody who wants to maybe not make a living as a children's author, but wants to get into that field?
I would say meet your audience. And I don't mean just one of your audience, like you have to be around kids so you can understand what their problems are and the current ones right now. Second is you'd want to meet your parent audience. What are they looking for? And how are you going to connect with them? Because I'm honestly, I think the hardest part for me right now is that I started with a base of people who like YA books. So, on my feed and Instagram, everyone who signed up for my newsletter wants YA books. YA books is the thing. I look at that and people are interested. And when I talk about YA books, I get to talk to teenagers online. I get to talk to the adults who are reading YA books online. With kid books, it's not necessarily like that. You have a buffer in between. So it's either the people the kids in person, or the parents in person. But online, it's always going to be the parent. So you are marketing to the parent when you're online, and you have to find out where they hang out. Now, Instagram, they do hang out on Instagram, but what are they talking about? It's very
Hmm.
different from my YA audience. If I start posting all about my children's book on Instagram, my Instagram like following goes down, people start unfollowing, or they don't respond well to it. So I'm having to learn, like, okay, I have to find a different place to promote my book. And I stopped posting as much about Dessi and Kai because of that, because I'm like, okay, I still have all these other YA books I'm going to be publishing. So I want to make sure I keep that audience. And I also want to post about this, but I can't do it all the time. How am I going to connect with them? So I've gone on to Facebook. On Facebook, that's where they're hanging out. But whenever they're hanging out in the groups, there's rules in the groups. You can't just constantly promote your work. So the easiest way, honestly, I found to connect with parents is honestly through podcasts. You have
Hmm.
podcasts, or you run your own group, like on Facebook, that you can promote your own children's work, or be in groups that have that, or have friends who are going to promote your work, because a friend can promote your work in the group, but you can't promote your own work. So you have to have friends in the group. So there's like a lot of considerations with marketing that are involved. And I'm still trying to figure it out, honestly. Right now, my new plan is to go to I have library visits. I've been doing Barnes and Noble book signings, and it's been easy for me to get in, mostly because I have already connections with Unbetrothed. So the people who would normally say no to me said yes, because they're like, you did really well with Unbetrothed, bring in this book. So that was really good. But also, I'm going to do libraries, and I'm going to go to homeschool conventions, because I think that's where my reader really is. So if you plan on doing a children's book, you have to consider how you're going to sell it. There's a lot of people who are doing indie publishing for children's book, and it's a very full market. So you have to figure out how you're going to sell it. Are you going to do a big batch also? Like I did a big batch of these, which means I printed them myself, and that costs a lot more money. Is it worth it? I'll find out when I go to all these different conferences and everything, if I make up my money again. So far, I've done, at the events I've gone to, I have made up a good chunk of it, but it's still not completely there yet. So we'll see.
Well, thank you so much for giving us the inside scoop on writing children's books. So, for people who do want to check out your work and know more about you, where can they find you online?
So you can find me on Instagram. You can talk to me about that. So I'm Candice Yamnitz. That is my handle everywhere, basically. So Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. And you can find me at my website, CandiceYamnitz.com. I really tend to hang out on Instagram and a little bit on Facebook. So those are the two places.
All right, I will make sure that those links are all down below so you have all the information to find and follow Candice as she comes out with more books, I assume, here in in the future. And you can check out the ones, of course, that are already out, Unbetrothed and Dessi and Kygo Poof, both of which are, on my list. I have one on my Kindle ready to go, and I'm sure I'll read it soon. All right, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to like this video, those of you who are watching. Subscribe to Carly Stevens Books for more writing, publishing, indie author life, and I'll see you next week. Bye.